rescue him, bring him home, and everything would be fine. So we huddled on the couches, the family, and about 6:30 that morning, we get another phone call, and we're expecting it to be the Coast Guard saying, "We got him, we're bringing him home." And instead, it was the Coast Guard, and they told us that they had boarded the boat, and no one was on it. And the second that I heard that no one was on it, when I could hear that voice on the other end of the phone, the breath left my lungs, and the thought in my mind was, how can I live without my brother?
We're going to go ahead and lower our rescue swimmer.
To add to the mystery, not only was the boat empty with the engines idling when the Coast Guard found it, but the coolers were stuffed with expensive food and champagne.
The Coast Guard originally said that, well, it was a boating accident. The boat must have hit something and thrown him overboard. But we looked closer, and we saw that the 2 GPS systems, which are guidance systems that track the boat, where it goes and where it's been and how to get where it wants to go, both systems were erased. How do they erase themselves? How does a man, wait a minute, let me erase my GPSs and then I'm going to fall overboard? And it was obvious to us as a family that something terrible had happened out there.
Coming up, how had Jimmy T just vanished off his boat? What had happened out in the ocean?
You can be out for most of the day and it's beautiful. But then once that changes, it changes dramatically and it changes quickly.
And the dive team discovers another wreck on the seafloor, which could be one of the missing planes from Flight 19.
Now it's, well, you know, here's a wreck that someone could have lost their life in.
On January 12, 2006, Jimmy Trindade was traveling back from the Bahamas to Palm Beach. The route took him right through the middle of the Bermuda Triangle.
We got a call right about dusk saying that something had happened out on the ocean and Jim was missing. When I could hear that voice on the other end of the phone, the breath left my lungs and the thought in my mind was, how can I live without my brother?
We're going to go ahead and lower our rescue swimmer.
His boat was found with the engine still idling just off the coast of Florida. The navigation equipment had been mysteriously erased, and the coolers were full of food and drink. Jimmy T had simply vanished.
When I heard he wasn't on board after they had found the boat, I couldn't believe it. It was a complete shock.
Fred Greaser was a close friend of Jimmy's and was part of the huge search effort to find him.
Jim's wife, Candace, called me to see if I would take the plane and go see if I could find him. And we took off from Stewart, went straight away to where the boat was, still circling. Coast Guard was on the scene. There was a virtual armada of aircraft. Coast Guard had everything out there. Really, at first, I kind of discounted anything really happened to Jim. Jim was a very able seaman and had made that trip hundreds of times. I just could not figure it out. If he had had a heart attack, if he fell overboard, it was to this day, it's very difficult for me to try and put that together because it just does not compute.
Professor Brian House is an expert on the seas off the Florida coast. He believes that it's possible that Jimmy T was caught unexpectedly by a rogue wave.
Rogue waves can have dramatic effects on small boats, particularly because they're not. When you take a small boat out, you're not necessarily expecting to get really rough conditions. And then all of a sudden, a large wave, much larger than what's happening, will come up and cause problems with the boat. Rogue waves have been known to damage ships all the way up to freighters and super tankers, have broken out windows on cruise ships that are in 50 feet above the water. So you can imagine what a large rogue wave would do to, say, a small 20-foot fishing vessel or something like that.
Some of them, what happens is that they try to jump into the water and they try to swim to shore because they see it and they see that the boat is floating away. And they underestimate, A, the current, their physical ability of doing it, and sure, end up perishing.
No trace of Jimmy T has ever been found. He simply vanished into thin air in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. For Patrick, the mystery of what happened to his brother will remain with him forever.
You know, anytime that you're out there on the water in the Bermuda Triangle, that whether it be natural or supernatural, anything is possible. But to date, we can only know what we know, but how can you ever be certain? How can you ever have closure? The ocean and what happens out there is a mystery in and of itself.
On December 5th, 1945, 5 TBM torpedo bombers and a PBM Mariner seaplane disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle and were never heard from again. It's one of the greatest mysteries of modern times, and now it might be solved. Mike Barnett's dive team has been searching the ocean off the coast of Florida and believes it may know where the wreckage of this PBM Mariner is.
What we know is that this PBM Mariner, from all available information, experienced a mid-air explosion and rained debris down over probably a pretty good area. So we might not be looking for a single intact wreck site. We might be looking for debris spread all over the seafloor.
On the first day of the dive, they thought they'd discovered it, but it turned out to be a small World War II Corsair fighter plane. Now on day 2, more determined than ever to find some wreckage from Flight 19, they've picked up something interesting on the sonar.
Mike, you there? What we're looking at on the bottom right now is pretty small, but it does kind of have that linear fuselage type look. Over.
I have a good feeling about this one, you know, and I was believing that this next one was going to be the PBM for sure. I just had kind of this weird vibe that it was going to happen, you know. So.
Yeah, we're going to splash Evan. We're going to splash Evan first, and then I'll follow him, and then I guess he'll swim over to your boat and do the likewise over there. So once we get set up and we'll anchor up with our sterns hopefully close to the ball, then we can go from there.
It's got a good look to it on the bottom. She's about 3 or 4 feet of relief, and it's got a good size, maybe 15 or 20 foot long, depending on how we're shooting across it. So it's kind of interesting. I got kind of a good feeling about this one. I don't know why.
We dive right down to a very large engine. So as soon as I see that large engine, now I'm thinking, all these feelings were right. Today is the day for sure. This is the PBM. I know it.
As I was swimming around the wreck site, my mind was racing, thinking that we may have found the PBM Mariner. It didn't look like a single-seat fighter aircraft. There just wasn't a lot of wreckage there, just bits and pieces, just mostly debris. So this might very well have just been an engine blown off the wing when the Mariner exploded in midair.
Then I see Heather kind of get this look. So I see she's got some material in her hands, and so I start helping her dig, and we dig out what is obvious to me as parachute cord. Now it's, whoa, you know, here's a wreck that someone could have lost their life in.
Yeah, the gauge would be?
Yeah. Got it. Thank you. That was awesome.
What do you see down there?
Well, as soon as we got down there, you know, it's clear that it's a big radial engine. We found what looks like a gauge cluster. Then we started digging around a little bit, and the coolest find, I think, is there's a parachute.
It's great. Definitely a radial engine. Nice big fat octopus hanging out right there at the bottom.
The octopus was cool too.
And what we're pretty sure is a large piece of parachute down there. I brought a small chunk of it up. It was very exciting to find the initial piece of the parachute that was sticking up out of the sand, and then to uncover the rest of it. And that, of course, immediately brings thoughts to mind like, did the pilot eject and not make it? Are we going to suddenly find that we are diving on a definite grave site?
No, it was good. Like the others said, It's a large radial engine. It's propped down in the sand with one blade sticking up. We sort of dug around a little bit and uncovered the other, at least two of the other blades, maybe all three.
The next plan is to go down and do a little excavation, try to expose more of the engine and the prop and other portions of the wreck to find more evidence that will help with identification of this site.
Jeff, you hang your laundry on that line?
At the end of the second day, they need to find out if their hunch is correct and whether they have found one of the most important aircraft wrecks of all time, the PBM Mariner of Flight 19.
The exciting thing about all of this is we've got an aircraft out in the middle of the ocean that maybe nobody knows about. Maybe this is yet another Bermuda Triangle mystery, but we're going to find out for sure what it is one way or the other, and if there's a mystery to solve, we're going to solve it.
Coming up, UFOs above the ocean, and a U.S. Navy ship is buzzed by ghost rockets.
The thought had occurred to me this could be something other than man-made. However, I just never knew, and I don't think I'll ever know.
There have been hundreds of reports of UFOs and strange lights over the Bermuda Triangle in recent years. But their connection to the bizarre events and disappearances out at sea has never been explained.
As they're coming over, we see that there are actually two light-colored, almost white-colored cylinders. Really? Rockets, essentially, flying side by side.
In the late 80s, Kurt Rowlett and Dave Malcolm were working for the U.S. Navy as civilian contractors, based at the top-secret AUTEC facility in the Bahamas. It became known as the Underwater Area 51.
In those days, you didn't talk about things you saw because you were bound by secrecy not to discuss things on the test range.
On one occasion, sailing from the Bahamas back to Florida, Kurt saw what he describes as ghost rockets pass overhead.
We were on one of the LSTs. It's essentially the flat-bottom landing craft-looking boat. And I think this one was, I'm going to guess here, 90 to 110 feet long. We're sailing due west, and out of the west, suddenly we spot two lights. As they're coming over, we see that there are actually two light-colored, almost white-colored cylinders, rockets essentially, flying side by side. And we both kind of like, what the heck? We're leaning out the window, checking this out as it goes by. It doesn't really look like an afterburner, but it looks like two really hot lights, coming from these things, and they disappear over the horizon. It was a kind of a rather ordinary-looking object that was doing something that seemed to be kind of extraordinary. So I kind of leaned towards like UFO.
Right.
But, I'm always waiting for someone to come along and give me, I'm always willing to listen to, a more rational explanation than that, but that's close enough for me.
People will tell you, I was there in the triangle and I saw this, or I was in the general vicinity and this is what happened to me. It's a story that they experienced, and the human experience is what we are dealing with here. Sometimes the paranormal is more normal than we realize.
But it isn't just UFOs that are reported out at sea. A number of vessels have reported seeing phantom land masses way out in the middle of the ocean, which appear for a short time on their radars, then disappear.
And something just slowly came into my view.